Wonderful. Thank you so much, Noel. And I want to thank Emerson, Harry, and the rest of the Nothing Con team for what seems to be absolutely incessant labor on behalf of us all. And I'm very, very grateful to be here and very, very happy and appreciative to be speaking to this really wonderful audience of seekers and teachers. And so, I thought I would start out with a little analogy. Imagine you were in Siberia. You were in Siberia on the vast plains. You just escaped from some kind of monstrous prison of some kind. You're being hunted down by who knows what guards. And you're cold, you're alone, you're thirsty, you're hungry, you're running for your life. And just at that moment, you hear a voice which says something like, "This isn't real. Ignore everything around you. I'm here. Focus on my voice." Something like that, let's say, right? Now, your first reaction might be, I don't have time for that. I'm running for my life from these guards who are chasing me. But for some reason, you decide to take a chance, a little leap of faith, and in fact, you ignore your surroundings, and you focus on that voice which says, I'm here. And little by little, you see your surroundings dissolve in front of you. And you find that you're actually not in Siberia at all. You're in a warm, beautiful jacuzzi in a wood-paneled room with someone that you love. And you're sitting there and everything is clean and gorgeous and beautiful. And you realize that Siberia and the hunt and all of that was just a dream. Yes, it was just a dream. That's right. That's right. That's right. And so you're talking with your loved one. And as you're talking, you start to get to an argument with them. And then you notice that actually the wood-paneled walls are actually not that clean. And isn't there a cockroach over there somewhere in the corner? This place does not seem quite as nice as you thought it was. And suddenly, what was this beautiful jacuzzi itself is starting to become very claustrophobic and painful. And then again, at a relevant time, that voice chimes in one more time saying, again, this is just a dream. Ignore your surroundings. And again, the voice says, just remember that I'm here, right? It's the same thing. And again, you're like, well, yeah, but I can't resolve this argument with my partner and blah, blah, blah. But somehow you decide to take that little leap of faith. And again, you ignore your surroundings. And again, you follow that voice which says, I'm here. And now you find that too, that jacuzzi dissolves, and suddenly you're on a mountaintop, and you realize that the entire jacuzzi and Siberia were like together they were a dream. They were a dream that you dreamt, but you're actually on a mountaintop, a beautiful, green, verdant mountaintop, and the air is clean and fresh and beautiful, and there are plants and flowers everywhere, and there are birds singing, and you're picking flowers and you're enjoying yourself. And again, things turn sour. And again, that voice remanifests. You're like, I can't really enjoy this valley if I'm thinking about this voice. But again, you take that little leap of faith, right? And so again, you fall through. You have that moment where you're like, oh, this was a dream. And you go to another scene. Now, as this starts happening, you notice over and over that you're going from one dream to another. You start to make that little leap of faith faster and faster and faster. And as you do this, you break from one dream to another faster and faster and faster. And you have these little moments of insight, faster and faster and faster. And eventually, if eventually is the right word for this, you're falling through the dreams faster than they're appearing. You're falling through these insights faster than the voice even speaks. And at that moment, the dreams themselves, through which you seemed to be falling, that very motion of falling through the dream structure from one dream to another dream to another dream, through this voice, through this insight, through this ignoring of surroundings, through this listening to this I am here, all of that, the entire structure becomes so fast, so fluid, so smooth, that what seemed like motion itself becomes static and not motion at all. And then it turns out that there's been something else all along, a lidless eye. Could it be said to be watching this drama? Even that might be saying too much, since watching seems to be something which happens within these dreams. Was one awakened to this other thing? But awakening is what happens from one dream to another. So we can't say anything about what this is, except that whatever it is, this indescribable, nameless, whatever it is, isn't in the dream, nor is it in the awakening. Nothing can be said about it. And yet it's been there, quote unquote, the entire time. So this is, as you might expect, an analogy, a little metaphor, a little parable for what's really going on in this so-called enlightenment or self-realization process. There is every element of the quote unquote search in this. There is the dream, which is Maya or samsara, the illusion in which we're trapped and which can seem nightmarish. There is that voice which says, ignore what's going on. It isn't what it seems to be. And to look within somehow at the I, which has this outsized importance. And through that, there may be generated at some point this kind of aha moment, this insight. Insight that comes from, or seems to come from, the practice. And by the way, I should also note, the practice is, very importantly, resisted. Why is it resisted? It's resisted because you're being hunted by Siberian guards. You don't have time to practice. You don't have time to trust that things aren't as they seem to be, because survival is at stake. Pleasure is at stake as well. If the world is as you think it is, then there is no time to disregard it. But if the world isn't what you think it is, then there's all the time in the world. Practice leads to insight, but insight is merely another dream. It is through practice and insight, breaking the dreams faster and faster, quote unquote, that there comes to be a third perspective, which is not a perspective at all. And from that perspective, there is no dream. And all the cliche things can then be said. No dream, no dreamer, no awakening, no practice, no effort. And all three of these perspectives are valid, and all three of these perspectives are incomplete. There is practice, there is insight, there is awakening, and there is none of these. For what we're talking about is something which cannot be fully put into language. That said, there is something to be done. There is something to be done for the seeker. And the seeker's task is to facilitate that seeming process, the seeming process of listening to that voice, ignoring one's surroundings and going towards the I, a process that will culminate in the realization that the process was not what it seemed to be at all. Now, the techniques that I like to use for this are elaborations of the techniques that Ramana Maharishi set forth. And he put forth two basic major categories of technique: self-inquiry and surrender. And I should just preface this by saying that, one of the things that I often like to say, see, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, from which Ramana Maharishi comes, there was the notion of the so-called qualified seeker, who had all kinds of attributes of mental stability and this and that and the other thing. I think Maharishi said there may not have been any such perfect qualified seeker in the history of mankind, but it's to indicate that there are certain psychological and physical attributes that would be helpful to have that are not technically part of the spiritual process itself, but that can help quiet the mind. Because the basic process is, as you saw in the analogy, to quiet the mind and to look within. And so I often say seekers need to have, just as preliminary things, they should have a basic intellectual framework for the search. It could totally vary depending on the seeker how much of an intellectual framework they need, but they need enough to have faith in the path. Second, they've got to have dealt to some extent with their emotional issues, with the amount of honesty about their feelings and desires that they have. Now, nobody is completely honest about their feelings and desires. Everybody has got psychological issues of one sort or another. However, if it's the case that these issues are very strong and repeated, they can interfere with the spiritual search. And sometimes the best way to deal with that is not using the quote unquote spiritual techniques themselves. It is going to a good psychoanalyst, for example. So I'm actually a proponent of that in many situations, and it's something I benefited from myself. Now, that said, I want to conduct a little workshop here right now with you all and show you how self-inquiry and surrender work, sort of my elaboration or interpretation of Maharishi's beautiful, beautiful work. So let's start with self-inquiry. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to explain self-inquiry, and then I'm going to give you 3 minutes to practice it on your own. Now, the way I recommend you practice inquiry and surrender both are with your eyes open, and their techniques, quote unquote, I say they're techniques, I say they're processes, but actually, of course, in the end, they're neither. They're really pointing to simply your true nature. But that said, they're meant to be every waking moment techniques. They're not, you can do them formally in a sitting position for a little while if you'd like, but fundamentally what they're really meant to do is to rip you away from the dream. And that requires that they attack the sense of attachment to the dream that you normally have. So these are meant to be done every waking moment or as close to that as possible. The reality is, there will be interferences. So, so self-inquiry is, what is self-inquiry? Self-inquiry is defined by many people in many different ways, but the way I like to say it is that there's a very simple, fundamental, common sense that I exist. We all have that. Like, we all know I exist. I exist. In some sense, I'm sitting here, I'm watching this webinar, I am. And self-inquiry is trying to locate how it is that we have this knowledge. Where is this knowledge coming from? Like, we can attach, for example, we know how we see things. We can sort of point to where in our little inner movie, when we see a mountain, we can sort of connect the words mountain to something in our vision. And the same is true for any of our other senses and even for our emotions and thoughts. But that knowledge of, like, I'm here experiencing it all, where exactly is that coming from? So you try to turn your attention towards that. And the rule of self-inquiry, which probably many of you have heard, is where your attention goes next. You ask yourself, and it doesn't have to be verbal, but it could start that way, is this something of which I'm aware? And if it is something of which you are aware, that cannot be the source of your knowledge that you are. Why? Because you are aware of it. So then what do? Then you reorient yourself back to looking for that very right here, immediate sense of I am, where to go. You could also say it this way. You could also say it's whatever is aware of that object, and you can sort of pursue that, because as you look for the I am, what you'll find is you'll obtain a series of objects, and you keep going, you keep rejecting them essentially. You keep refusing to be satisfied with them and look for that very immediate light by which you know that you are. And so what self-inquiry is a continuous refocusing. It's a refocusing and a refocusing and a refocusing and a refocusing. It's as if I asked you to look at the horizon. Every time you looked at the horizon, you actually were seeing some sort of object between yourself and the horizon. And so when you recognize that you were seeing some sort of intermediate object, you refocused on the horizon, but then you saw another intermediate object and you refocused again. And so that very process of refocusing is self-inquiry. And it is to be done as a priority over any other thoughts or things that occur, period, ideally. Now, of course, easier said than done, but that's self-inquiry. So those are the basic instructions. I'd like to give you all 3 minutes to, with your eyes open, attempt it right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you all after those 3 minutes to just write down in the little Q&A section what it was like for you. Where did your attention go? Or if you have any little questions, it could just be a phrase, you know, very, very short. I just want to see where it is when you looked for that sense of the I, where your mind went. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 minutes starting right now. All right. So I'd like you right now, if you could, just put a little phrase in, a sentence or anything like that, just about what your experience was. Where did your mind go in the little Q&A section? And then I'm going to give you guys a minute to do that. And then I'm going to ask Noel here if he could please just read the responses, and then I'll react to them. So I'll give you guys a minute.
They're starting to come in. Don't be shy.
All right. Okay. So let's go ahead. And Noel, would you mind reading those, please? Or
Yeah, I'll start reading some of them. I see more coming in. So,
okay, great.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks everybody. Keep them coming if you got them. This is great. Thanks to Akilesh. That was great. So I see a sense of presence. You want me to just read them off? Like, are you gonna?
Actually, I actually see that I could actually see them right in front of me.
You can. Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Actually, read them. Is that okay if I just read them myself?
Yeah, man. Go ahead.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Just maybe easier. So, so I see, for example, a sense of presence to my body sensation. There seems to be just a blankness or stillness among a forest of objects, then a space of presence. awareness of here and now and mind chatter. I was just watching the thought process and watching attention and kept asking myself, what or who's watching? Repeated thoughts. Am I doing this right? This can't be it. Oh, I love these. These are so much fun. Silence and a few random thoughts. Mind was wandering a lot. Stillness, attention goes to body sensations. Attention goes to an object, then seems to go close to the face and back and forth, maybe because the sense organs are there. Brown soft couch, sound of rain, bird song, my body weight on the couch, quiet, great. Okay, so these are fantastic. So let me observe a very simple generalization about all of them. All of them, without exception, are thoughts of some kind or another, essentially. So what you want to do, whatever it is you experienced, to everybody on this list, you want to simply, relentlessly look from that thing or things, including things like questions or, more abstract things like even things like silence, right? Silence is also a thought, actually. Who's experiencing that? And you don't need to use the words, by the way. You can use the words if they help you, but it's not that important to use the words. What's important is that there is a feeling, your intuitive feeling of being here now, and being aware of whatever it is that you put down in this list for me. So to refocus on that once more, who's aware of the silence? Who's aware of these questions like, am I doing it right? Who's aware of the mind wandering? So this is great. Everyone did really well. What I want to do is I want to do it again. So one more 3-minute session, and let's see. I'm just curious. We'll see what happens. So I'm going to start it right now. All right. So if you could, one more time, if you could please just take a minute, write down your responses just like we did before, and I'll give you guys a minute to do that.
Okay, some more coming in. Maybe give it another 10 seconds.
Sure. Okay, so I see there's an intense sense of aliveness. There's dash, 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 which I really like. Lost track of doing, not quite sure what to say. Yeah, these are getting more interesting. Sort of like nothing, body sensation, to a sense of nothingness, loss of focus, trying to be here now, ignoring the mind, asking, who is this me? Who is the I? Thoughts, then whose thought is that? Then finding nothing, who's aware of finding nothing? Then frustrated thoughts, rinse and repeat. Yeah, it makes complete sense. Just looking, seeing, hearing, stared at my eyes. Oh, thank you. Couldn't help trying to figure out how silence is a thought. Lol. There is nothing here. I could not see who is seeing that. Who is it that is where? I'm aware of the presence and others are aware and part of the same isness. Can be connected in non-physical ways. That was only 30 seconds. Was better able this time to keep inquiring who sees this thought, who sees this sensation, etc. A lot of fear started coming up at the end. So actually what I notice here is people, the intensity ratcheted up. That's what I feel. And that the people were able to go past a lot of the superficial things and come to a somewhat deeper level. Now, nevertheless, these are still thoughts, of course, obviously. But I notice, right, some of these questions are really pointing at the riddle quality of self-inquiry, because self-inquiry is a little bit of a riddle, right? Who is it that is aware, right? Who is it that is aware indeed? This is a difficult question, because as you come to this, as you focus on that question and you notice that there is this kind of impasse, right? That you're looking as some people are, and you know, and you're trying and you're getting frustrated. Well, it's natural, because what you're looking for isn't an object in the normal sense, and yet it appears right there. So when you look for it, you can't find it in the normal way, but it's right there. You know, it's right here. As soon as you turn toward it, now it doesn't seem to be there anymore, but it's still right there. Even you're not seeing it. Even when you're not seeing it, you are the one being frustrated. So there's a little bit of a riddle quality to this. The important thing is to not lose heart. And if you are drawn to self-inquiry as a method, you might be more drawn to surrender, which I'll explain in a second. And of course, you can mix and match them. But to view it as, in a way, like a koan, you are pursuing a feeling that you know is right there. At the same time, when you look for it, you encounter endless complications, frustrations, and unclarities. So yes, how is silence a thought, for example? You're trying to figure out how silence is a thought. And the answer is you're aware of it. Anything you're aware of has a beginning and an end, and therefore we define it essentially as a thought. You know, even perceptions, as soon as you cognize a perception, in some sense, it's bound up with thought. So, but it's good to know, right? The very act of figuring out, who's aware of figuring out? You know, that's the question, right? So the mind is going to distract you with 101 different subtle ways and angles of looking at things, right? And at every juncture, to go from there back to this sort of landmark question or feeling, really, knowledge that you are, right? And so it's like you're trying to look at the light, essentially, instead of all the images the light is sort of putting out, and no matter how many images there are, you look past them at the light again and again and again, or you try to, obviously, because you don't know what the light is, but you know it's there. As soon as you look for it, it seems to not be there in some sense, but even it's not being there, it is there. So it's paradoxical and it's riddle-like, and this is normal. This is the nature of self-inquiry. It's the heart of the egoic illusion. That's why it's the weak point of the egoic illusion. That's why it exists as a thing. So that said, I want to explain the other thing, which is surrender. So surrender is sort of the other voice, the other part of the voice in the parable, where it says, ignore your surroundings. This is actually a complete path unto itself. Surrender, actually, the way I explain surrender is ignore all thought and relax, or even simply ignore everything. Very close to the same thing. Ignore everything except, you might say, the intention to surrender. So simply ignore everything except the intention to surrender. Now, I want you to guys to try that for 3 minutes, and let's see how that goes. And you might find yourself more drawn to this, or maybe you find self-inquiry more interesting. So let's try that for 3 minutes starting now. All right. So I'd like to give you guys, as usual, a minute or minute and a half or whatever to put in some responses, what that was like.
So there's some good ones coming in.
All right, let's start reading some of these. Now, I like that. Scary. Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. So, I mean, any of these practices, right, will run into resistance at some point because, yes, I mean, there is a certain sort of fear associated with seeing something very uncanny about what your normal sense of reality is. Now, the truth is, there's actually nothing to fear, truly, but it feels like there is, or it can sometimes. So that's normal. uh, like peeling off layers or watching them fall off. Yes, very much so. The layer analogy is great. It's true for self-inquiry. It's true for surrender, both. And by the way, I should say surrender and self-inquiry. I always like to say this, as Maharishi did as well. Of course, I'm just sort of taking off him in this case. They're really sides of the same coin, right? When you ignore everything, you're falling away from all changeable objects. And what are you falling away into? You're falling away into the self, so to say. If you pursue inquiry and you're pursuing the I, then you're also necessarily having to ignore changeable things because you're going past them every time towards the I. Relaxing, surrender, yes, easier to be in the heart. Noticed mind wanting to hold on to and focus on things. Yes, makes it struggled at first, kept trying to inquire, observe objects, then focused more strongly on attention to surrender, started to feel relaxed and happy. Yes, exactly. So there's a relaxation. There's a relaxation and peace that comes from both practices when they are done with concentration eventually. And the idea is that when that peace comes about, it it gives an incentive for the mind not to pursue its usual outward directed ways. It starts to see inner peace. It moves away from its attachments, its usual attachments, and it deepens the inward looking, and it deepens and it deepens and it deepens it. Expanse, constrict, body relax, no time seemed like forever. Yes, mind and attention still hopping around, but there was a bit of relaxation around, watching them do their thing. Disappearance, surrender, nope, surrender. What am I supposed to do? Surrender, nothingness, everything else is a creation. Yeah, I mean, this is great. So again, many of these things, are beautiful, and one should notice that they're also thoughts. So just like an inquiry, just as we in inquiry refuse to be satisfied with anything that comes our way because it's an object, right? In the same way with surrender, any phenomena that come up, whether it be silence or stillness or even peace, any of these things, ignore, ignore, ignore. And remember, these are meant to be every waking moment practices, right? So can you do it at all times? Of course, the answer is not immediately. It will be a gradual process for almost everybody. But that is a process by which the attachments are broken. And it's the attachments to our usual identity, our usual desires, our usual fears, and our regrets and our memories and all of that stuff that's broken through these practices. And that is the heart of what's going on. So that said, one more time, 3 minutes, going now. All right. And one last time, I'll give you a chance to put in your reactions. So you have some interesting reactions. Yes, quiet, blissful, lovely, presence, spaciousness. There must be more to do. That was a thought. I'm glad you recognized that immediately. Silence. Yes, yes. So exactly. Bliss, spaciousness, it's all wonderful. And that is absolutely what can and does and should happen. But again, to remember, right, never to be contented with that, or I should say, never to cling to it is really what I mean to say, right? In the presence of, in the practice of surrender, nothing is clung to. No experience is meant to be repeated. We don't want to try to hold on to anything. Just let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go. That's it. The deeper one, I got wrapped up in wondering who I am surrendering to, or what is surrendering to what. You know, that's actually a beautiful thought, and it shows in a way how surrender leads to self-inquiry, because in the end, that's precisely the thought that will have to come up and about, and it will be addressed. So if you keep surrendering, there's sort of two paths you can take. You can either just repeatedly surrender even that thought, right? You can just stay in surrender, period. Or you can bring surrender down to that point of silence, and then you can inquire. Either way, it works either way, and that's a great, it's great that that's come up actually. The deeper one goes, the more nuanced thoughts seem to be. Thoughts seem to be harder to qualify as thought. Absolutely, they become subtler and subtler. Time, expansion, contraction. Yes, time sense can change. Much better this time. Really was able to ignore thoughts, nip each in the bud as each arose, ignore them and slip back into presence awareness. It's great. So you can see, right, with just a few minutes of practice we've done here, right, I feel like many of you have gotten deeper very rapidly. And so you can see, right, even a little bit of this is very powerful, of either inquiry or surrender. And you want to do it more and more. And again, you want to have it, start to incurse into your daily life, right? Especially those parts of your life which are most emotionally potent, right? Relationships, career issues, right? All your fears and desires, right? That's where, we want to break the usual identity, the usual sense of I am a person, I'm a doing, experiencing entity. And that's where surrender and inquiry are concentration practices. They're not just concentration practices, but they come to the very core of the sort of quote unquote riddle at stake here. One more thing I wanted to give two little quick analogies because they both came to mind before I forget them. So one is, I often analogize surrender to thinking about like if the TV was on. If the TV was on, it could be on, but you could just ignore it. So similarly, surrender is just ignoring the TV. You're not trying to change the channel. You're not trying to change the program. It can just be whatever it is. Feelings can be whatever they are. Thoughts can be whatever they are. You don't even have to like them. You don't have to say they're good. They just are what they are. And you just turn your attention away, mercilessly, and just relax. Like you have nothing in the world to do. Don't worry, you will be compelled to do things. You'll find out that you can't just sit there doing nothing. Almost nobody can do that. But that is the basic practice, right? And similarly with inquiry. Yes. Okay. So that's mainly what I wanted to say. And thank you all for going through these exercises with me. I wanted to say a couple other things real quick before I open it up to questions generally. One is I have an interview with a wonderful friend, my friend Bill. That's in Void Village. So I just encourage you all to take a look at that. Yeah, I think that's mainly it. If you know, I maintain a website at siftingtothetruth.com, so you can feel free to contact me there. Just generally speaking, if you have other questions, you want to get in touch. But yeah, I'd like to open it up to questions generally. Noel, if that works.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, we'll give everybody a second. So you're getting some. Well, you can see the questions, yeah?
Oh yeah, I can see the questions.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay, yeah. So,
Cool.
so now that we've gotten reactions down, I'm just gonna take any questions generally. I've given a lot of information very rapidly, I know, and so I try to give sort of a little taste, I think, of what this is all about, but also kind of the essence. And so there's a lot of questions that come up, and that everyone in a sense is their own little puzzle, I feel like. And so yeah, please send in questions right now, and I will address them, whatever they are. So how do you combine self-inquiry and work/desire? I need to think, if I want to have a good career, can I? If I don't identify with that thought? Great question. So this comes up a lot. So technically speaking, right, inquiry is attempting in a way to break the idea that you are the doer of your actions. That is the egoic illusion. The egoic illusion is, I have to effortfully concentrate to make things happen. Like, okay, I have an assignment, I have this work thing, I have whatever, homework, whatever it is, right? If I don't do it, nobody will. I have to do it, right? That's the egoic illusion. That's what feels like burdensome, labor, all this stuff, right? So inquiry is saying, who has that thought? Same with surrender. Surrender is saying, ignore that thought. It's a lie, basically. So can you have a career and work and so on? And the answer is, of course you can, but it will happen. It in fact already does happen currently, although it doesn't feel like it to you, without your feeling that you're the one doing it. So when you say, for example, if I don't identify with that thought, you can't choose not to identify with a thought. That would be another thought. What we can do is rip ourselves away from the thought complex entirely. Let thought take care of itself. The body and the mind, you can almost view them as like somebody else. Like, Ben, you're asking this question, you should view Ben as somebody else. So somebody else called Ben is going to deal with Ben's work issues, whatever they are, and Ben will either succeed or fail as that happens. And there'll be both, as there is in everybody's lives. But you, for the purposes of practicing inquiry, are questioning the assumption that you're Ben. So when you question that assumption, it doesn't affect Ben. Ben is doing what Ben is doing, whether it's good or bad and successful or failing. And so we're questioning, it's not about, I'm going to do work while trying not to identify with it. I mean, that's a sort of practice too. It's sort of, you could call it like a kind of karma yoga. They have that idea in Hinduism as well. It's sort of a preparatory practice, right? So if you do your work effortfully, but try to maintain the idea that I'm giving up the results or fruits or outcome of the work, I try to maintain in mind that I'm not the doer of this actually, that can be preparatory. And if you really can't sustain inquiry or surrender, you're too afraid, that could be helpful. It could help quiet your mind for a while. But ultimately, you'll have to go to the point where you really question the assumption. And that means that you're gonna have to question the boogeyman that will jump out at you when you really try to practice these in the midst of life, right? You have this work assignment, you're trying to do inquiry while that happens, and the voice is now gonna come and say, hey, if you're doing inquiry, you're not doing the work. If you're not doing the work, bad things are gonna happen to you, and it's gonna try to scare you into dropping inquiry and doing the work. And that is indeed, you might say, the question. Because if inquiry, if non-duality is, so to say, quote unquote true, then the perspective of the illusion is false. But if the illusion is true, then of course it would be it would be scary to do inquiry. Then you would in fact. So this is why, right? You need to have a certain amount of intellectual framework. have dealt with your emotions to a certain extent, and also realize this is a gradual process, that you will gain conviction over time, and that will allow you to confront the scarier and scarier situations. But that said, the more you are able to summon up faith and courage and, realize that these are just boogeymen, that these are just shadows, that you cannot be truly touched by any of the failures or successes of life, then the more you'll be able to actually hold on to the inquiry, even while these voices are screaming at you, which is what ultimately has to happen if you want to, quote unquote, get to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, if you want to use these problematic metaphors. All right. I could not see who was surrendering when there's only oneness. Does surrender not strengthen the ego? So this is a great question. So here's the thing. So you're absolutely right that surrender, as we're doing it, seems to be an effortful practice. Well, here's the thing. The problem is that, you think you are the ego currently. To that one who thinks that he or she is the mind and body, that one is being instructed to surrender. The end of that process will be that there'll first be a consolidation, right? So the mind right now is, based on its identity as body and mind, it's very sort of dispersed, okay? From that dispersion into the many activities of the world, it will be concentrated into either surrender or inquiry. You're right, that is an egoic practice. But the end of that egoic process will be a concentration that eventually destroys itself and reveals that what appeared to be an egoic, effortful process, in fact was nothing other than the truth. So this is something which the mind cannot fully comprehend, is the honest truth, but this is the fact. So you're totally right. We are functioning within the quote unquote ego for a while, because otherwise we're talking to seekers. What are seekers? Seekers are illusion on the end, right? The whole search is an illusion in the end. But that said, we have to follow the process. The end of the process will be to see that what was thought to be the search, in fact, wasn't. Other questions?
Akilesh, I just want to say thank you so much for coming with this. When you first presented the idea of doing a workshop and having it interactive, I thought it was a great idea, and you fulfilled your vision for it. So thank you for bringing this, and thank you for everyone for submitting your answers to those.
So
that was awesome.
This is really wonderful, and I'm very, very grateful to have had the opportunity.
Cool. Well.